Hey everyone, it's Emily and I'm finally getting around to doing a wrap up from the month of December, the last month of the last decade, and I had a really good reading month. I read quite a bit and I was overall excited about a lot of what I read, so let's just jump right in. So the first thing I read in the month of December was Blood Witch by Susan Dennard. So I'm caught up in the Witchland series, and this follows a cast of characters with different abilities, including a Blood Witch who can control and sense people through their blood. There's a Truth Witch named Safi, a Thread Witch who can kind of sense the threads and emotions between and in people, and she and the Truth Witch are thread sisters, which is my favorite part of the series. There are Tide Witches who control water, Wind Witches who control wind, so it's a really fun story with a bunch of different kinds of characters, and there's a tentative truce that's kind of coming to an end, so there's a battle for power and control and resources, and some people are trying to protect this tenuous peace that, you know, they're hoping to maintain. And so it's just an interesting set of politics that are going on, interesting sets of characters, and I just absolutely love this story and would highly recommend, both for the characters and for the plot. I think there's a good mix of both in this series, and I'm really excited for the next ones to come out. I don't remember when the next one is set to come out, but I think there are 2 more in this series, so I'm very excited, and excited to reread the ones that I've read so far, read them physically and annotate them. So yeah, definitely would recommend. So the next thing I read was a library book, which is why I don't have a physical copy, but it was An Untamed State by Roxane Gay. This is her first full-length novel, I believe, and it follows Muriel, who is a Haitian American. She is back in Haiti with her family when she is kidnapped in front of her husband and young child and held for ransom. Her family in Haiti is quite wealthy, and she's kidnapped for ransom and held for about 2 weeks and essentially raped and tortured and brutalized for 2 weeks as her captors are negotiating with her parents on the ransom. And so part of the book follows that experience, and part of it follows the aftermath of that and her trying to come to terms with that, and the people around her trying to come to terms with what happened, and you know, the changes in her, you know, and how they can best help her, you know, in the aftermath of that experience and the changes that she's undergoing, along with her trying to figure that out for herself. And I loved this book. I thought it was so beautifully written. I love Roxane Gay's writing, and I want to read everything that she's ever written. She's just such a gorgeous writer, and I think was just born to be a writer. And it's obviously a heartbreaking story that at times was incredibly difficult to read, because it's just a brutal story about trauma and working through that trauma, or, you know, trying to work through that trauma, and, you know, what's going on during that as well. And I mean, but it's also just a fascinating look at kind of human psychology, I think. And I think she has been very open about her experiences with sexual violence and a lot of other things. I still need to read, there's still more of her works that I need to read that explores this. But she's been very open about her experiences with sexual trauma. So it's fascinating to get that perspective from a survivor and kind of look at the human dimensions all around that experience. So I would definitely recommend reading this book and anything else Roxane Gay writes, because she is just wonderful. I next read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This follows a man named Jason, and he is going out one night to get some ice cream for family night, and just a chill night in with his family, and in that process he is kidnapped. Just a lot of books about kidnapping in December for some reason, but he is kidnapped and knocked unconscious. When he wakes up, the life that he remembers, there's no evidence that that life ever existed, and instead he has evidence that he has lived a very different life. And so it's him trying to figure out what's going on and how to get back to his family. So it's, you know, a fun thriller sci-fi, but also kind of has deeper discussions of family and connection and what you're going to do for the people that you love. and I just thoroughly enjoyed the ride. The audiobook was fun. I did listen to this one on audio, and I thought it was just a fun audiobook. I thought the narrator overall did a good job, and I was just so interested in what was going on. I loved the weird parts of this, because there's definitely weird parts, but I thought it was all really well written and just fun and entertaining and super fast paced, and yeah, I would recommend if that premise sounds intriguing to you, because I thought it was executed really well and had a great time reading it. So I next listened to The Afterlife of Holly Chase by Cynthia Hand. I listened to this on Scribd, and this one was pretty entertaining. It follows Holly Chase, who is kind of a terrible person, and she is visited by the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future on Christmas Eve, and is told to change her ways or she would die. And she doesn't. She laughs it off as some delusion that she had, and continues to be a terrible person, dies, and it follows her in her afterlife, where she actually becomes the ghost of Christmas past, working for Project Scrooge, which is a company. It's set in New York City, and it's a company that essentially picks one Scrooge a year and kind of studies their life and their memories, so that on Christmas Eve they can kind of go through the story arc of A Christmas Carol to hopefully convince them to be better people. And the Scrooge that they pick for the year that the story takes place is a young man who Holly comes to find as she digs into his memories. She finds a lot to relate to in this character, and a lot of what he has experienced kind of mirrors what she has experienced, and so she kind of, the story gets a bit more complicated as she's kind of digging into his past, and a lot of it was predictable, a lot of it was kind of cheesy. There were a couple of things I didn't see coming, but overall I thought it was a predictable but fun story that I really enjoyed listening to around Christmas. I wouldn't say it's gonna go down as my favorite story ever or something that made me think super critically, but I thought the narrator did a really great job, which I think was part of why I found the story so entertaining, and I just wanted to keep listening and see what would happen, and yeah, I had a great time listening to this. So yeah, would recommend if you're just looking for a light, fun, something to listen to or read around Christmas. So I next tried to read and ended up DNFing The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling. This follows Barry Fairbrother in a small English town, and Barry actually dies at the very beginning of the story, and he is a council member, or was a council member, and so there's a vacancy on the council, a casual vacancy, and it's about this town, their reaction to his death, and them trying to find a replacement for him on the council. And ultimately I DNF'd because I was just bored. I talked about this in my cozy little readathon vlog, so I'll be sure to link that below. But yeah, I was ultimately just bored, and I think 150 pages in. I didn't particularly, and it's kind of following a bunch of different characters around this town, and I didn't particularly care about any of the characters. They were just kind of sitting there gossiping about the town and the people in it and Barry, and I just didn't really care about any of the gossip. I didn't care what they were doing. I ultimately just didn't care who replaced him on the council or what would happen, and I don't know, I just thought it was really slow, and I didn't want to read the rest of, it's a 500-page book, and I just didn't want to read the other 350 pages, so I decided not to. I then listened to The Book Thief by Marcus Zuzak on audio, and I absolutely adore this story. I listed this as my favorite favorite book of 2019, so I'll also be sure to link that video. And I just fell in love with the story. It's a very quiet, slow story about a little girl named Liesel. So her mother had to give up Liesel and her brother. Her brother died along the way of her mother trying to give her to this other German family, for this other family to raise her and her brother. But her brother dies along the way, So we follow Liesel as she's being raised by, this family. So this family is also housing someone who is Jewish in their basement, and it just kind of follows this family in World War II as they're just trying to survive, and it's just a beautiful story. I fell in love with all of the characters. I just thought the writing style was so unique. It was just such a unique and interesting way of telling the story. It's narrated by Beth, and so it's an interesting perspective, but also I just thought the writing was just so gorgeous. And Liesel essentially takes comfort in stories and in books, and it's an ode to how powerful stories can be to kind of get you through hard times. It's an ode to families, both biological families and found family, and how connections, how vital they are in going through such horrific experiences. And I just loved it. I loved, it takes a while to get into, but I fell so in love with all of these characters and this book, and yeah. I also listened to Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and this one took me a while to get into, but once I did, I really did come to care for this family. The mom, their father's away at war for most of the book, and it, so it follows this mom and her 4 daughters, and it's just about these sisters and their life, and I just kind of fell in love with the story overall. I thought it was so much fun, and there were so many just interesting discussions that happen, and it was just an interesting glimpse into what life for women like them would have been like at this time, and the things that women were doing at the time to kind of push back against what people thought women could do and should be. And I don't know, I just came to really appreciate the story and just the quiet way it just introduced you to life and just kind of immersed you in this town and in this family, and it just gave me such a warm, cozy feeling. And there's a lot that happens, and I was emotional at different points in this story. There were parts that kind of were slow and dragged a little bit too much for me, and I was glad to have the audiobook in those moments to kind of get through some of the slower points in this book. But overall, I definitely enjoyed it. I also really loved the movie. I wanted to listen to the audiobook in preparation to see the movie, and I thoroughly enjoyed the movie as well. Absolutely loved it. So yeah, that was the last full-length novel that I read in 2019. The last thing that I read so this is the first volume. I read volumes 2 through 5. My brother let me borrow them, and I gave those volumes back to him when we were back at home for Christmas. And I love this series. I love it so much. So it follows a group of women who deliver papers in Cleveland in the 1980s, and through the process of their work one morning they come across this machine and essentially are kind of thrown into battles between people who can travel in time, and that's really all I want to say. There's queerness representation in here. These women are so kick-ass and so funny, and the people that they meet throughout this story are just so interesting. And I definitely want to read the last volume. There's a 6th one. I definitely want to read the last volume, and hopefully can find that. I think my brother recently got it, and so I might be able to borrow it from him at some point. I don't remember if he said he actually was able to get it recently or not, or hopefully I can find it somewhere at a used bookstore. But I absolutely love this series, and that was the last thing that I read in 2019, the last thing I read in the last decade. And overall, a really good reading month. Let me know if you've read any of these books or have any thoughts about them. What did you read in December? Were there any highlights for you that you read? And I'll be sure to link. I now have a bookish Twitter and Instagram. I'll be sure to link those down below. I also have my regular Twitter and Instagram that I'll link down below, as well as my climate channel. So yeah, be sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.